Yes, thank you for tuning in. So, what I'm presenting today is an interview that Richard Dawkins did with a Catholic priest, George Coyne, some time ago, actually. I think at least 10 years ago. Dawkins was making this for a television program. It was never aired, but he has actually aired it on his own channel on YouTube. So, it's an hour long. I've actually clipped out about 10 to 12 minutes of it because most of it is actually George Coyne preaching, saying how wonderful God is, how important Christianity is, and what place Christianity has in the modern world, etc., etc. I don't want you to hear that preaching. We're only going to deal with Dawkins actually challenging George Coyne on why he believes, what is his evidence. So let's start off. He's talking about a cardinal who wrote a book, and he was criticizing what he calls evolutionism, which he says is taking the science beyond its remit and making the claim that man is really just reducing man to material, the molecules that man is made of, and not acknowledging everything else that man is. So let's have a listen to what he's got to say about that and Dawkins' response.
Is to take the best scientific explanation we have and extend it beyond the science is what he calls evolutionism. That is to reduce, for instance, to reduce the human being to a material object in the universe and fail to recognize that from other disciplines outside of science, there is a much richer, if I can use that word, richer view of the human endeavor.
Yeah, so this cardinal's making this claim. I wonder who he's accusing of doing this. I personally have never met anybody in my life that thinks man is just can be just reduced to the material of what man is made and not recognize art, beauty, love, etc., etc. This whole rich, diverse array of abilities and potentialities that man has got. It's like a straw man. I don't know anybody. I'm an atheist. I've no hard materialists who don't say this. They acknowledge what man is in terms of what he's talking about. So it sounds to me like a straw man. So what?
That is religion, culture in general, literature, poetry. I mean, the human being is not made of just what scientists discover.
Yeah, maybe you'll tell us something that we don't know. What has this got to do with your belief in the existence of God?
Human being is made of. Scientists, in the very strict methodology of science, the human being is more than what methodologically science can discover.
And I don't think that any scientist would deny that. It's just a complete straw man. I've heard it before, mainly from Christians. Man is more. How can you explain man's appreciation of art? How can you reduce man just to a material thing? Who's doing that? I'm not doing that. I don't know any atheists or materialists that do that.
If we're talking about poetry, which you've just mentioned, then there is a sense in which anybody would have to accept that that's true.
Yeah, okay. Dawkins there really articulating much better than what I've just been kind of ranting and raging about. Yeah, he said it beautifully in just one sentence.
However,
Anybody would have to recognize it.
there are many scientists who would say that there's nothing actually supernatural in the human makeup. Poetry is something which emerges from brain stuff in a way that we certainly don't understand in any detail. But I think I certainly would want to make a distinction between acknowledging that on the one hand and trying to bring in something supernatural on the other.
The idea of bringing in something supernatural, I think, is a caricaturization of what religious faith is all about. A scientist or any other human being can accept or deny the supernatural. But what you cannot do is on strictly methodological scientific grounds, deny the supernatural.
Yeah, well, that's a switching of the burden of proof, because science is not denying any of the, or at least any of the supernatural claims of religion. But you don't accept claims simply because science can't deny them. You accept claims because you've got positive evidence. So he's classic switching of the burden of proof.
No, I think I agree you can't actually deny it, but Isn't it then part of a very large population of things that you can't deny, for which there's no positive evidence? I mean, you can't deny fairies at the bottom of the garden, but neither of us take it seriously.
Positive evidence is a key
He really slapped him in the face with pure logic on that one.
word here, I think.
Okay, evidence. Now he's talking about evidence. What's your evidence?
Is there any?
Oh, there sorely is positive evidence for the supernatural, but it goes outside the scientific endeavor, because the scientific endeavor, by its methodology, is limited to explaining natural events by natural causes, or if you wish, I don't like to use the word material, but we can use it in this context, material events that we observe by material causes, and it's limited to that. But it is limited to that.
But you've used the word evidence. What sort of evidence are you speaking of?
Well, I'm speaking of the whole traditions from, at least 2,000 years before Christ up until modern times, but the whole of Judaic Christian, of Islamic literature, of church traditions that have been passed on since the founding of the church, etc. They are all well
So scriptures and writings.
established human endeavors. Now, you can examine those and accept them, or you can examine them and reject them, but they have to be examined. They are clear evidence outside of science. I mean, they're
When he's talking about you can examine them and accept them, what does he mean by accept them? I presume he means accept the claims within them, accept them as evidence of the supernatural. All we're talking about is writings from the last, he says, going back 4,000 years to back to the ancient Greeks, etc. And all we've got are writings, all we've got are claims, and we haven't got any hard evidence to support any of those claims, and that's the problem. That's why, personally, without that proper hard evidence to support the big claims like the miracles, etc., the resurrection, I couldn't possibly accept those claims. I would think it would be more rational to reject them. But he's saying that examining them, he's accepting those claims. But he hasn't got any hard evidence to back them up.
they're not tricks. Somebody is not tricking us into believing in the supernatural.
No, but they're evidence.
Yeah, okay. I mean, he's saying that they're not tricks. No, okay, it may well not be that people have dishonestly written things down. It may well be that they're mistaken. It may well be that they're tricks and that they're trying to deceive. They're trying to start a religion. Many, many, many different explanations besides the one that he's trying to prove, which is that the supernatural exists at all.
Evidence that in these traditions people thought certain things, but that doesn't mean that what they thought was right. It's hardly evidence just that people for 2,000 years have thought something.
That is correct. That is correct. But if I examine what they've thought over this long period of times, I find that I can, without divorcing my...
So he's talking about reading these scriptures and books, what people have written. If he examines what they thought, that without giving up his right to be a rational scientist, a methodological scientist, he can, without any contradictions, claim to be a rational person. I think that's what he's going to say.
whole rational structure, I can accept that. I do not find that I, as a person and as a scientist, am sort of schizophrenic. That is, I'm being strict about my scientific methodology, but I'm being juvenile. I'm being non-rational. I'm being non-inquisitive when I accept scriptures and church tradition.
He may be a good scientist, and it may well be that within the realm of science he's doing good science. But by accepting supernatural claims based on what people thought in the last 2,000 years, he's being very irrational and he's being very juvenile in his thinking.
And all that comes with them. I think it's coherent.
Yes.
Well, it may be coherent and maybe it isn't, but it's certainly not rational and it's not justified.
Yes. You mentioned both the Christian tradition and the Islamic tradition. These are not the same.
Buddhist? No,
yes.
they're not.
So how do you decide which one? I mean, you're a Catholic priest. Why light upon that tradition rather than any of these other ancient
It's because
traditions?
of my history. All of us have our personal history, which we struggle with. I mean, I grew up in a very Catholic family, okay? Does that mean that I've been duped? I grew up in a Catholic family. I went to Catholic school.
Well, it most likely means you've been indoctrinated, just as somebody growing up in Buddhism would be indoctrinated, or growing up in Islam would be indoctrinated. And they could be standing with Dawkins saying exactly the same as you're saying.
Schools. I questioned it, went through the traditional juvenile rejection
Yeah, but if he's already been indoctrinated, by the time he comes around to questioning it, he would already be tainted by confirmation bias.
of this, rejection of that. I grew up as an adult. I studied science, and I found through my own personal history, and I think this reflects many us believing scientists, through my own personal history, I found not only was there an inconsistency, but there was a coherence.
But if you had been brought up in an Islamic country, you'd be a Muslim, therefore.
Probably so. I mean, we are all subject to our personal histories. I can't
Well, we
deny
clearly
it.
are, but
Yeah, well, if that's the case, how could the doctrine of eternal damnation for non-believers in Jesus be justified if we're all subject to our personal history? It implies that we haven't really got any free will over the matter.
doesn't that undermine your feeling of validity of the one you just happen to have been born into?
No, because this is a faith statement now. It's my firm belief that God deals with each of us in his own way.
So the Muslims believe...
Yeah, okay. He prefaced that by saying this is a faith statement. Yep, in other words, no evidence to back it up.
Beliefs which contradict yours are equally valid in his personal history and therefore
That's a
equally
very
valid?
challenging question. I would say there are ingredients of God's speaking to the Muslim tradition, to the Buddhist tradition, to the Catholic tradition. There are elements of God's true revelation to these people in all of those traditions.
Okay, well, what he's doing there is he's validating all the different religious traditions, I presume probably mainly monotheistic. That would really just reduce it to Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, I suppose, and maybe some others. But he seems to be saying that if you're subject to your own personal history, it doesn't matter which religion you're brought up in and which religion you believe in, you will be okay. Dawkins doesn't really in this interview ask him whether, shall we say, a Jew will go to hell in the Christian worldview because a Jew doesn't believe that Jesus was the Savior. Unfortunately, he doesn't ask him that, but based on what George Coyne actually says in this interview, I would imagine he would reply in the negative and say no, because God has revealed himself in different traditions, in different ways to different peoples, and you're subject to your own personal history. That is going to a large extent, not 100% extent, but it's going to determine which religion you grow up believing and accepting. And therefore, God possibly couldn't blame people for not accepting that Jesus is the Savior. So they wouldn't go to hell, they would be sitting in heaven. So there's nothing to fear. And I would say if you extend that, I'm subject to my own personal history. I don't believe in the existence of God. I've got no religion. And based on what he said, if it's true, I've got nothing to fear either. And if none of us have got anything to fear because of our own personal histories, and it doesn't really matter which religion you believe in, then there's no point believing in any religion at all. Okay, we'll watch a bit more and then I'll call it a day on this interview.
Each of us wants to make our own claims. I think it's always wrong for any of the traditions to claim that they have the absolute truth, that they are the ones that God really speaks to.
And yet that's what all religions do, including his.
I think that's a caricature of what happens, but it has happened in history, of course. We have to face that.
Why don't you accept those things which are universal, like the existence of God, why do you, in addition, accept those things which would be contradicted by these other traditions, like the, I don't know whether the virgin birth or some part of the Catholic tradition which is particular to the Catholic tradition?
Because besides, believing in the existence of God, I firmly believe that God has spoken in a very special way, through the Jewish tradition up until the birth of his own son.
Okay, well, now he's contradicting himself, because he says, after all, that this is the absolute truth, that he's claiming that this is the truth. So now he's contradicting himself. And by extension, one would have to presume that if he believes that Jesus is the Son of God and came to cleanse the sins of mankind, anybody not accepting Jesus into their heart, including all the Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus out there, etc., and atheists, of course, will be subject to eternal damnation. So I don't know what to make of him. He's full of contradictions, and he hasn't really presented a coherent case for the existence of God, and he has really just trotted out fallacy after fallacy and straw man as well. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought of that. The whole interview is available. I'll put a link below the video. Bye for now.